In the 1560s, there was a rampant refugee crisis in England, with thousands of Protestants known as strangers fleeing persecution. On their quest to find a safe place to land, they ended up in Norwich at Strangers' Hall. Would you like to know more about how this estate ended up helping thousands of Protestants during Shakespeare's lifetime? Let's find out right now on That Shakespeare Life. Strangers' Hall is a grand Tudor merchant's house in Norwich, originally built in the 14th century and expanded in the 15th and 16th centuries by wealthy cloth merchants who traded all across Europe. Unlike royal estates owned by the crown, Strangers' Hall was a privately owned place by influential Norwich merchants who played a central role in the city's thriving textile industry. It was one of England's most important trades during the Tudor period. In the 1560s, religious conflict and brutal persecution swept the Low Countries, which is modern day Belgium and the Netherlands, as Protestant communities were targeted by Catholic rulers. Thousands of Protestant refugees, known in England as strangers, fled for their lives, seeking safety across the Channel. Norwich was England's second largest city at this time, and it was famous for its booming wool and textile trade. And its leaders recognized that welcoming skilled weavers and artisans could boost the city's economy. As a result, Norwich opened its gates to these refugees when many other cities were wary of outsiders. Strangers' Hall became a hub of support, providing shelter, resources, and a place for the strangers to start new lives. This unique combination of economic opportunity and humanitarian welcome turned Norwich into a haven unlike anywhere else in Tudor England. As Shakespeare's Sir Thomas More poignantly puts it, imagine that you see the wretched strangers, their babies at their backs, and their poor luggage. So you've got these people showing up in droves with nothing but what they can carry. To learn more about how Strangers' Hall and the city of Norwich responded to this crisis and what the stories reveal about life in Shakespeare's England, I sat down with Bethan Holdridge, curator of Strangers' Hall and expert on Tudor architecture, and here's what she had to say. Hello, Bethan. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, Cassidy. How are you?
I am doing very well, and I'm very excited to talk about Strangers Hall. We have never covered this yet on our show, and I wonder if you could tell us about the people that were the strangers that the hall is named after. Who were the refugees coming to England in the 16th century?
You know what? I wish I could give you a really straightforward answer to that, but as you know, everything in history is very complicated. So, first of all, Strangers Hall, the name Strangers Hall, we now tell the stories of strangers, which I'll go into in just a second. But we don't know for sure whether the hall was named after those refugees. The term strangers in early English, I suppose we could say, could be anybody who was from outside of your area. So in the records of Norwich in particular, about which we're going to be speaking about this evening, basically we have a reference to a stranger from the 13th century. He appears in the court records, and he's a stranger because he's outside of the medieval city walls. So he's seen as being somebody from outside of Norwich. So the term stranger meant anyone who was from outside of your locality. Where strangers in Norwich differ in particular is in 1565, the person who was living and owned Strangers Hall, Thomas Southerton, he invited some weaver families to Norwich to rejuvenate our flagging textile industry. It was in a really bad way. These weavers came from what we call the Low Countries, so Flanders, Holland, we have northern France, Walloons, but the original 30 families had actually settled elsewhere in the country before then. So we know that some of them were invited. They were all living in Sandwich, for example, or they were living in Canterbury. They came to Norwich, probably not all 30 who were originally invited. It was in 1567, so 2 years after those original 30 families came to Norwich, or almost 30 families came to Norwich, that we have a refugee crisis for, not even for want of a better term, it was a crisis.
The story of the strangers remind us that Tudor houses like Strangers' Hall were more than just timber and stone. They were lifelines for people in desperate need. You can hear the full conversation about Strangers' Hall, its role during the refugee crisis, and other Tudor house secrets, and my complete interview with Bethan Holdridge at castycash.com/episode 272. I'll put a link to that right below this video. Until next time, may your doors be open to those in need, your hearth warm with welcome, and your stories carry on for generations. Thank you for watching. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.